Hello, welcome back to the David Watson podcast. I had an interesting conversation with a lady called Lynn, and it kind of went off on a tangent, which, as you know, I love. It's how she went from Wall Street to time out. Let's just take time out. And it's a great message for all of us. Hello, welcome to the David Watson podcast. Now that I've remembered we should be recording and starting a podcast instead of just talking. How are you doing?
That's the way to do it. Hi.
Yeah, because
Great.
for people that won't know this, we've just spent about 10 minutes talking about Stonehenge, and then I was just like, oh, actually, we should probably start recording. Which reminds me of the email where I said, oh, did you want to send a press back? You're like, no, we're good. Organic is great, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's brilliant. That works well for me. This is my preference for podcast, and
I
yeah,
know. I think we clearly have lots of interests and lots of research and lots of things that we can talk about. So it's more fun to play a little bit. And I'm not in the business of selling, right? It's just like I'd love to meet interesting people and
yes,
let's
same
get
as I
into
mean
it.
that's kind of primarily what the podcast is about. It's just an opportunity to you know what? It's a really cheeky way of getting in touch with people and just asking you things I wouldn't normally be allowed to talk to you about. I'm just being
I
nosy.
agree.
You know what I mean? It's just like, because you
I
meet
think
people
it's
sometimes, don't you? And you're just like, oh, I'd love to ask them about that. And you can't because it's impolite. But if you can get somebody on a podcast, I can almost, within context, just have any conversation you're prepared to have.
I agree. And I think it allows you to settle into an hour or 45 minutes or whatever it is, and you have this authenticity where of a conversation we used to have back in the day, pre-phone, when you'd go to a coffee shop or run into
Yeah,
someone
that's,
at the dry cleaner or the grocery, and you could make eye contact and have this community. And I like that about this space is you can have that sense of community even across the globe. And sometimes I really do freak out a little bit that I don't have as many friends locally because I worked so many hours when we moved here. And I'm growing that again as my kids have gotten out of diapers and they're in middle school. But it's nice to have these conversations. And now I really am leaning into the fact that I have friends everywhere. East Coast, West Coast, London. I have all over
you said something
Australia.
there that was interesting about the 1 hour conversations you might just have because you bump into somebody at a coffee shop. One of the premises of the podcast when I first started out, when you sit down, like, what is it I actually want this to do? Um, is I wanted it to sound like, do you know when you get on a bus or a train and you just sat next to somebody and you just start talking, and they're either great conversations to be in or great conversations to listen to, and
Yeah.
that was as simple as the premise was. It wasn't outside of that. I just wanted it to be like, and with that understanding, like if you're on a bus journey somewhere, the bus is going to stop and one of you is going to get off. So that's the end of the conversation.
Yeah.
But you just,
It's sort of like that for me. It was airplanes. I
yeah,
traveled for work. So it was like, who did you sit next to? And I had this one conversation. I remember I was on my way back from Texas. I lived in California at the time. And this gentleman we were in the way back. And so maybe you're referring to this too, like these moments or these things that people
mm,
say to you or strangers. And keeps sort of indirectly asking what I took care of in my life. And I was in my 20s. I had all these titles and I was getting promoted left and right. And I literally thought, I said to him, I don't have a cat. I don't have a dog. I'm never home. I don't even have a plant. And I still remember thinking, I need to slow down because I can't even take care of a plant, let alone an animal or a kid or a relationship. So I agree. And then I don't even know what that guy's face looked like, but it
yeah.
stands out.
No, I get that because as you can imagine, I've had a lot of conversations with people now over 5 years, and I can't say that I remember every face or every name, but whenever I look back, I do remember snippets of every conversation. Somebody has always
Mm,
said something fairly meaningful. Or um, one of the things that I just wanted to carry on with quickly is we were just talking about Stonehenge and what it's about and what it means. And you visited Stonehenge. I live near Stonehenge. Um, One of the things that fascinates me is nobody can agree what it's about. And the reason it fascinates me is because depending on who you're talking to, depends on kind of what version of the story they want it to be. So there's the prehistoric version that prehistoric man discovered these stones. Some say they came down from Wales, some say they came from somewhere else. Because it's a blue stone, if I remember correctly, and it's not found locally. Um, but then there's the maths that enabled it to line up with the solar system and on Pacific dates. And then, well, how did they do that? Because they're just supposed to be, you know, not far removed from Neanderthals with stone tools, but somehow they knew how to line up perfect geometry. So then you get the alien theory. Then you get the, well, actually, were we already in an advanced society that got taken out by a meteorite? And these are just a few of the survivors that, you know, came back. And it just fascinates me because we just don't know.
I have been there. I've been lucky enough to be there. It was when I was studying abroad. I specifically wanted to go there. It's always been interesting to me, and I now do Reiki and energy work, and I'm clairaudient. So I have these different connectivities now.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it is such a spiritual place, and it's such a place where you feel such reverence. Even though when I visited in my early 20s, or late teens, I didn't really know what to expect or what I would feel, quote unquote. But one piece that stands out to me, theories aside,
Mm.
although the alien piece we can talk about too, but I went down a rabbit hole when I was recovering from a surgery in 2023 and I ended up in my own alien vortex. But the rituals, I felt it was such a ritualized space.
Mm.
When and still now, however it got there, it seems like the sacred place for some sort of, I'll use the word ceremony because I don't know what else to call it, whether it was celebratory or an indoctrination, it just feels so grand. I mean, obviously it's huge, but it also is a place to hold. It has this element to hold people and ritual, and that's what comforts me, regardless of how it got there.
Yeah.
And I have raised Catholic, no longer practice. My kids practice in the school they're in. I'm much more of the spiritual piece. It just helps me connect to that bigger universal life force energy, that there is this bigger power. And it helps me when I see things like the LA fires that are going on in the US right now, that there is a bigger plan and that some things will persist even if our planet, really can't handle it right now and we end up doing a reset, which sadly I believe will happen. I'm not a weather science, meteorologist or scientist, but anyway, I just love the sense of ritual, and that's what I'm trying to do in my life because otherwise it's too overwhelming. Like, how can I have these little rituals? But Stonehenge, now you make me want to go back. My kids are begging me to go to London and Paris. They're still too young, but that wasn't on my list, but now it's back on my list.
Well, there's an interesting addition to Stonehenge that people don't know very much about because it's not there to see anymore. But about quarter of a mile, half a mile from Stonehenge, so Stonehenge is effectively within the Avon Valley, and there's the River Avon that flows down. And I can't remember when it was, probably about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. They realized, because like I said, there's stones that are nearby as well, that are in other fields, but there's a village nearby that the river runs through. And in one of the back gardens, they found some of these old stones that had been
Mm,
moved and taken, been used for different things and stuff like that. And they believe once upon a time that there was like an archway, a stone archway on the river, so that anybody coming down or up the Avon by boat or just walking, because obviously, however people communicated back then, it'd be like, well, yeah, just keep following the Avon, keep going north or go down, and you would get to this archway, and it was symbolise this is where Stonehenge. This is where you get off and you follow this path now up to Stonehenge. That path doesn't
Mm,
exist anymore. But there's archaeological evidence that there was this doorway, this stone like archway that okay,
wow.
here's follow this path and this takes you to Stonehenge, which again makes people think that it was more than just a local thing. Plus, like I said, there's other places like Avebury and things like that, and it's just like actually how many of these existed. And they like I said, there's some in France. I think there's some all over Europe, and all built
Like you
roughly.
said, they're all roughly built at the same time, really probably impossible to connect. No planes, trains, and automobiles, right? These little
Yeah.
makeshift boats or horses and things like that. And how did they all know what happened that they all knew?
Hmm.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I like that you called it a doorway. I get it. I get the arc, but just the fact that it was a doorway into this special place, or
Yeah.
maybe there were these priestesses that were practicing, and they were able to. Maybe they were coming for healing. Maybe they were coming. I just love the idea that it was this procession to this place. It sounds comforting to me.
I yeah. I mean um I'm in two. I always have two different opinions. The first one is I quite, and I this is more. It's acceptable because I understand it, which is
Mm,
that we were already an advanced society before Stonehenge. There was some kind of chasmatic event that almost wiped us out. Because there's this kind of theory that if 90% of the population is lost tomorrow, 10% will survive. Well, amongst that
mm,
10% will be some engineers, some geologists, but they'll be spread all around the globe.
mm,
Because people don't realize, like we talk about there's 8 billion people today, but there wasn't a billion people on the earth until about 200 years ago. So it's the
mm,
last 250 years that there's been rapid growth. Um, so if you lost sort of 90% of the population tomorrow or even more, there would be pockets of people, like the farmsteaders and stuff like that, who have never given up any of their skills, who know how to do metal work and things like that, who were, if they're in the right place, they're going to survive fine. They're not going to be inconvenienced, you know.
mm.
Whereas people like me, I need to be right in the center because I'm no good to anybody if there isn't modern technology around, Um,
I'm
I
not sure what
suppose I
I
could
could do.
become a good
No.
workhorse for somebody, but I don't have a transferable skill set like ironmongery or understanding of basic hydroponics or anything. So
No. My husband's a DIYer. He could figure it out.
yeah,
He would be fine. I would be less inclined. I don't know. I could grind up some herbs and make a potion probably.
yeah, this is it. And so I understand how that works logically, and so I'm okay with that. It's just like, yeah, that would make sense. So there were people around. Why they built it, I don't have an answer to.
Mm.
What its purpose was. Was it a place of celebration? Is it a calendar? Is it a way of communicating? Because somebody just decided to do it for shits and giggles because they got drunk on something they fermented one night. So look, guys, I've got this great idea. Yeah,
Right. Those kings and queens and all the people said, let's just try it. I know. It's also crazy that we don't know. Like, as smart as we are, quote unquote, like, how do we not figure that out?
but
It's
this
it's
is the thing.
interesting,
This
and
is
you
why
live there.
I question it. This is why I have another theory, is because as smart as we are, there's so many things we don't know about how things were done. So it's that classic thing. You don't know what you don't know. And as soon as you're falling into that category, you are then blind to things that you have no awareness of. Everybody is. It's not anyone's fault. But you if you're not aware of something, if you don't have an awareness of anything, then you by default are blind to it. So I find it interesting, like with people that you do Reiki, you do Oracle cards and stuff like that. Once upon a time, our entire culture, every culture as some form of mystic, psychic, etc., etc. So long before we even had words to describe this type of healing, this type of intuition or anything like that, there were people that were renowned for doing it. So obviously, has there always been an element of people, like some people are natural engineers, some people are naturally tuned in to the way the earth moves. And over time, like anything, once upon a time, if you go back a few thousand years, walking 10 miles was nothing. Now people
Right.
post up, they're celebrating because they've walked a mile today. And everyone
I
else is like,
know.
I don't know how you find the time to do it. Once upon a time, you walked 10 miles every day. It,
Right.
and it was nothing. You didn't even think about it.
I am not, I'm analog. I do not
Yeah.
track how I walk. I just know if I did or not, but I agree. I
So what
agree.
else did we
It's
forget in terms of intuition? If you were always sleeping out in some form of delta, some form of connected to the earth, and you're only ever looking at the sun, you're only ever looking at the stars, you can understand animal calls, you understand what herbs help you and what herbs don't, what plants you can eat. What you're going to be incredibly tuned in.
I do believe that there has been, and through my studies, I think why I continued to study energy and still feel very connected to it and integrated in all sorts of ways now. But when I started to study, and I've done yoga because I lived in California and everyone was doing yoga, now I've been doing it for almost 30 years. But there, the Yoga Sutras have a connectivity to your body as your intuitive guide. Then you have Japanese, which is the Reiki, but then you have Chinese, which is acupuncture, Qi. You've got words to describe it everywhere. Prana. Some people, if you believe that Jesus walked this earth, that he in fact had a healing modality with a Reiki type
Yeah.
hands, he always talked about hands-on healing. So I think in every culture, and why I got comfortable with this space that's very hard to describe, it's like, well, if you really look into it, every sort of religion or society, or even some of the Western doctors are starting to integrate this now. It's like there is something to this higher power connecting to your intuition. So for me, I pay a lot more attention to the animals you're talking about, what's flying around. I live in a suburban town outside of Philadelphia, so it's, pretty populated. It's not like I'm living in the forest, but what birds are around? What am I understanding? What's passing around me and through me? And I just get quiet. And maybe that's the piece we're missing. Like in that time of the last 200 years, we've just gotten so loud. And so the quieting, and maybe they must have had a lot more quiet back then when Stonehenge was built. But, this ability to really listen to yourself, your body, probably lots of kids running around
Mhm.
and knowing who was the village oracle, like you said. And my daughter is in middle school here in the US, sixth grade, and she is learning about a society in China, and they talk about having oracle bones. They used to use bones of ancestors to give them guidance. And I said to her, people say, oh, it's so woo and it's so wacky that your mom has an oracle deck. I'm like, they used this years and years,
Yeah.
thousands of years ago, the same word. So I just like bringing it into practical senses, but I love like taking a minute and being like, what do I actually think about this? Now, it's not perfect science, but rather than second guessing myself, I'm like, no, I've heard this multiple times. I've heard this message multiple times. Keep going. And that also helps me stop doing stuff. Like I was trying to write a book. I ended up having two surgeries. And then I'm like, this isn't the time, the place, or the book. So just let it go. It doesn't always mean doing more, I guess is my point.
Yeah, I think that's. I was talking about this on a recent episode. Um, there's times in my life when I seem to be, I had this recently. I wasn't talking about this, but it's just sprung to my head. I recently went to get a haircut and I was in a hurry, and I knew I was in a hurry like 3 or 4 days beforehand. But I was just like, do you know what? I want to get it done on Saturday, because I just fixated on getting it done by Saturday. And long story short, by the time I got into the hairdressers, and it's early in the morning, and I'm sat there, and this guy is doing my haircut. He doesn't speak great English, which, if you're in England, isn't a surprise for hairdressers. People will understand if they're in England. Um, I realised it's like this haircut's taken a long, long time, and I don't think he actually knows what he's doing. Right, so I actually just tell him to stop and ask him to get somebody else, which he didn't seem to understand. So somebody actually came over and said, "What's the problem?" And I was like, and I just blurted out, "Is he even qualified to cut my hair? Because he doesn't seem like he knows what he's doing." And they're like, "Oh, his English is just bad." And I was like, "No, I've asked him to that lining, and he keeps trying to put it somewhere else. He doesn't know what he's effing doing." And the guy's like, "Look, are you okay for me to finish it?" "Yep, no, that's fine." And the guy who clearly knew what he was doing, um, finished it in 5 minutes. I'd been, and it's like, if you're a bloke especially, you know how long it takes to get your hair cut. We're not
Right.
fussy, you know what I mean? So it's just an old fashioned short back and sides, really. And when I'm in there for 35 minutes, it's like, mate, you don't know what you're doing, do you? And so, and the reason for that is I already knew that was going to happen, because I was just trying to
Mm,
force everything, because I'm just trying to get it
yeah.
done. I'm trying to get it out of the way so that I don't have to deal with it during the week. And I'm becoming much more and more aware of this, that when I try to do things in a hurry, it just goes wrong. And but as soon as I just take my foot off the gas and just accept it's
Right.
going to happen, it's just like, yeah, it just seems to, I don't know, things just unfold in their own way. But I have this, like, I think I'm obsessed with trying to control the universe. It's just like, you should
Mm.
be listening to me, and this is how I want it done.
Right.
And
I agree. I
you know,
agree.
I think because the universe is quite old, it's probably harder hearing because it doesn't seem to listen very well.
Right. In the same way, coming at it maybe from a different angle, and I am going to get my hair cut after this, ironically, but my word for 2025 is ease. I am
Mm,
so sick of forcing things, or like I did on Wall Street, I'm sick of forcing everyone to follow along, or I'm sick of trying to force timelines and actions and big and little. I'm like, if it's not easy, I'm not doing it. That doesn't mean I'm not motivated. I'm hyper
yeah,
motivated, but it's like, how can I just take the easier path for myself? Because clearly the universe has one. So I keep getting this ping, I call it a ping, that I'm supposed to write or publish a book at 50. So I'm 48. And I have said some version of that sentence since I was 43. So why was I trying to get a book publisher when I was 46 and about to have surgery? Like, it makes no sense, right? So these things, it's just like, you know what? It's going to figure itself out. And when I personally, I don't know about you, but when I get going, things happen very fast for me.
yeah,
So just like let it go. Like, who cares? It's going to happen. Or maybe it's not a full book. I'm just giving you that example. Like you're giving the haircut. It's like,
yeah.
just
But
take it the
that's because
easy path.
I find that when I find a natural flow state, things
Yeah.
just unfold, and I can't explain how that happens without going down kind of the woo woo route that people get very funny about. But I do, like the manifestation, if you like, or is it just you're in the zone? So you just see opportunities because you're not trying to control the situation, you're just responding to it. And I don't know. I just know that every now and again I get this feeling, and it's like it's the picture that just popped in my head. It's like when you're in a queue and you're trying to push the person in front of you to push the person in front, and you're just getting impatient because there's a
Yeah.
queue. And yet there's somebody
Right.
within that queue who's just sat there looking around, chilling out, like, we're not moving anywhere. It's not going to speed up. What a great opportunity to just watch the world go by. And they're having a great time.
Yeah.
I'm getting a migraine.
Right. Right.
And the
Right.
only difference between the two of us is the one that accepts the outcome. I'm still going to be served. I'm still going to leave the shop. I'm still going to buy the goods. It's just not in the speed, the time frame that I've demanded. Even though, and this is like the craziest thing about this, like this analogy, we will all at some point in our lives walk into a shop that's really busy, get frustrated because it's busy, then queue up and complain because it's so busy.
Right.
And it's like, right, it's absolutely all in front of you. It's couldn't be a more accurate picture of this is bedlam and chaos. And you've decided to join it and then moan about it. You could actually just
Right.
go to another shop, come back later. There will be nothing that I need immediately that my life depends on.
Right. I know. And that's the piece of it I'm trying to do also, just to make decisions. Like you're saying, maybe this spring I take a break from helping my daughter's team, or because there's chaos over there and there's gossiping and there's negativity. I'm like, you know what? Maybe this spring I'll come back in the fall, or I am looking to do more programs and workshops and things like that. And this one woman who is at one of the studios I'm considering, it's the closest to my house. And she listed 25 things I have to do to get even one workshop off the ground. And I just said, you know what? That doesn't seem easy because
Yeah,
I had a second surgery in December. And I was like, I am taking the path of ease. I am not printing a booklet. I am not going to cry that I need a job at this one studio. There's something that's not a fit.
yeah,
2 days later, my friend is like, hey, are you interested in doing some programs once a month? I'm like, yes, I am. You're my friend. You reached out. But until I was like, you know what? Even though that's the closest place to my house, there's something not, those aren't my people. But the old me would have pushed and printed the booklet and gone and sat there. And it's just to me, and I think this is what you're saying is like, if you're going to put your energy in the queue and you're going to stand in that chaotic shop, that's a choice.
yeah,
So I'm like, my energy is so sensitive now. I just have to go where I can get the thing done, love it, be in flow state, but then it doesn't drain me. So I can be in flow state again in the afternoon or again in the evening. And I want to be more in that zone because I am so sensitive. I carry the frustration. So that getting a coffee and taking 20 minutes or getting my hair done and then the rest of the day I'm like, can you believe that guy didn't know what he was doing? I don't want that. I want to sort of control who I'm letting in, even with the haircut. But I like that you spoke up because not a lot of people would speak up.
yeah. I mean, he kind of forced me. I was doing my best to
Mm,
just be patient. At one point, I even just closed my eyes and just like, I'm just going to relax into this situation and just don't, you know. Um, but when there was a point where, like I said, that line, that's the part in, and I just get it shaved slightly because it just gives it a bit of width and it's just easier to keep the part in there. And it kind of makes a feature of the part in as opposed to kind of the old way you just combed it. But he was trying to bring it kind of down here, and it's just like, no, it's got to go where it is. But he didn't understand. I was just like, okay, stop. You're not doing it anymore. Yeah. How did
but
you?
that takes some guts too.
Yeah, I'm better at that. But but none of us want to be rude. Not intentionally. Most of us don't intentionally want to be rude, and we just sometimes, you just like. So there is a part of me. It's like, you know what? It'll grow out. It doesn't matter. But just wasn't. No, no, I'm not having this
Mm,
today. One of the things you mentioned Wall Street. So
mm.
what what was Was there a particular turning point with Wall Street where you just decided, no, I don't want to do this?
There absolutely was. I'm pausing because I think there were two.
Okay.
I'll start with the easier one first. The less emotional one is that I ended up really loving getting the promotion. And I love the title, my ego, and in some ways still is, but was wrapped up in the title. And I pushed for a job that did not fit my life. My husband was in a job transition. I had young kids. They were moving schools post COVID. It was at the tail end of COVID. And it would require a lot of travel, like a lot. And my husband, in creating this business, was also entertaining a lot out at night. Like it just would have been no parents at home. And so I think in pushing for that role just to get the title, I was like, whoa, there was a real, like, what am I doing? A real reckoning. What am I supposed to be doing? So it was a real click of, oh God, I got this job. Whoopoo. Oh God, this is not. So it's this, what do I need in this phase? And then I'm about to write another article or idea just for everyone dealing with a big trauma right now. Some ideas that I have, which is the real reason that I ended up leaving, is that my manager was murdered. And I was coming back from a second maternity leave. And it's taken me a long time to say those words without getting incredibly emotional. But when we went back to work after that week and her husband was the one who did it, it was they found out in a hard way. It was all over the news. None of us suspected any abuse. So there was a real shock, but then we had to go back to work. We got a new manager very quickly. It was very chaotic, very sudden. And they only had one day that they had therapists, psychiatrists on site. And I happened to be working from home that day. I was returning from maternity leave, so I wasn't in every day. And I missed the day. And yes, there were other resources. You could call a 1-800 number, you could call, but the real kicker for me, David, was that they required us to sit on the same floor in the same seats in the same, and they just shut her door. And I thought to myself, this place is going to kill me. And it took me a long time to get out of it, but I thought no one really cares. If someone actually not only dies from a disease or gets murdered violently, and this is what we're dealing with, they don't care. So I need to save myself. And I still have people that I love who I worked with, but I think that ecosystem was so unhealthy for me. I knew then I had to formulate a plan.
I think that's something to I have a slightly different kind of look on that. Um, and it's from a business perspective, not, and this is what I want people to understand is problem with these, like those, that ecosystem is you literally in a position where somebody has taken another person's life in rage. It's murder. They've killed somebody. The ecosystem of the business is so they can't serve us anymore. Move on. And and that's just any environment. You know, you could be a farmer. Well, the cows still need milking. The sheep still need putting out. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? Right? You have to get on with business. But the important bit is the difference. The farmer doesn't do that. The farm stops. In Wall Street, if you don't turn up, it carries on. You're not significant. And
Right.
people literally give their whole lives believing it has meaning and purpose to Wall Street, to the company, to the firm. No, it doesn't. You're just a cog within the system. And it's not to berate the jobs, but it's that thing where people get emotionally attached, or create a belief system around a value that they have that just doesn't exist other than inside their own mind of how important they feel they are to the project. And no, you're just not. And like you said, you kind of probably with that kind of sensitivity and that intuition, you saw it probably in a much more raw state than everyone else. So it's like it must have almost been like, pardon the kind of the pun, but like being ripped out of the matrix and seeing it for what it is.
Right.
Just like, do you guys not see what's going on? Like they said, the door's just closed, and it probably wasn't that long before somebody else's name was put on the door, and
Right.
somebody else was behind the desk, and you're seeing this in black and white, like it's just clear as day. Like this just isn't right. And well done for having the strength to leave.
I mean, it took me a long time and planning, and what I know that I need personally is to feed my brain. And by brain, I mean my whole system. So that was when I started reading more and I started diving into what is possible. It's when I started looking into Reiki. It's when I like even now in January I signed up for a human design course about how we interact just because I want to. I don't know if I'm ever going to do anything with any of these things
Yeah.
sometimes, but I just want to keep feeding a piece of me that feels really alive. And I can have meaningful conversations that aren't about football or whatever, insert, the weather. I want to have these interesting conversations. Have you had this perspective? What do you think of this? Or I just read this. And I still love all of that. Like I read, I don't know if this is popular in the UK or in Europe, but I read the Gallup studies, the institute. It's like an institute that does a lot of research around human behavior.
Okay. I think I know which
And
one you mean.
yeah, and I'll send you the latest one. They do a lot of trends. It is primarily US, but not always. And they, like, I'll still read that as if I work in corporate, and I still coach a lot of corporate people. And I stayed for a long time, and some of my clients do too. And that's okay. It's like, I get it. We have mortgages and we have to
Yeah.
eat and I get it. We need insurance, but you have to know why you're staying. Like, I'm staying not because this is so important. Because, I have a friend in the hospital right now and he worked 24/7. And I'm sure he's thinking to himself, I mean, he literally almost worked every weekend trying to make these deals and relationships, and he worked during the week. And I can't help but wonder if he's laying in his hospital bed right now thinking, like, what is that all for? I should be doing my hobbies or with my kid, whatever the thing that lights him up. So all that to say, I have hardship and frustration and I have health things going on, but I still make time for things that light me up because of that experience.
I think it's really important to kind of grasp that. Many years ago, one of the first people I ever coached was a gentleman. He was mid-30s, incredibly successful. We're talking early noughties. He's on a six-figure salary in London. He drives a Porsche 911, and he's got like this nice terraced house. And he was earning money then that I could only dream of today. You know, but when you broke it down, he was miserable, and I mean like proper miserable, because he was stressed because he couldn't literally afford his lifestyle. It was he in terms of expendable income, he didn't have much more than I did because he
Mm,
was mortgaged to the hilt, credit cards, cars. And I just said to him one day, like, you realize you could sell your house with the equity and everything. You could buy a nice, like a studio flat in the center of London, be mortgage free, sell the Porsche. You could drive a really nice BMW or Mercedes. And he just went, but what would people think of me?
mm.
Just like, dude, you would have zero debts for the rest of your life just from selling your house, getting rid of the Porsche. You would pay everything off and actually have enough money to go and buy a nice flat in a nice part of London and be debt free on a six-figure
Right,
salary. You
right,
with your brains, with everything you do, you could create a 5-year plan where you could be in a chateau in
right,
France in 5 years, like living
right.
the dream. Yeah, but do you know what I mean? What would and he was
I
just
get it.
he was so obsessed with yeah, but I have this nice terraced house, and it was in the centre of London. It was very nice. he had the car, but it was all about how he felt other people perceived him. And I was just, but it was killing him. It was literally, I mean, I don't know what happened to the guy. You know, obviously after a few sessions, he didn't hear what he wanted to hear, and it was time to move on to somebody else that had listened to him. But it was, I always, that
I
I've
know.
never forgotten that kind of like, yeah, this is very,
It is this addiction to the brand, your own brand.
yeah,
And I'm talking to a good friend right now, and part of it is we're having different than a coaching conversation because he's one of my closest friends, but who cares
mm,
if you want to be home with your kids and go to their games, then let that be the thing. Take an easy job. You don't have to always be selling these startups. And you could go back to selling the startups, but you have 5 or 6 years with your kids in the house. So it's this trade-off. And what I try to think about, I don't know if this is how you where you are now, but it's like let's just take it one year at a time. Let's take it 2 years at a time. We don't have to create this lifestyle for eternity. It's impossible, and every stage needs something different. Another set of my clients are also now caregiving, getting loved ones into Alzheimer's units or cancer hospice, right? So there's this crunch of can I even keep this huge job up when I want to be with my parents who are aging? Or
yeah,
there will be a reckoning. I just happen to have a lot of these reckonings, I think, early in my life. My one friend says you can find answers to any questions you have. But I really do feel like I've done a lot of this before most of my friends, unfortunately for me, and fortunately for me.
I think it's the one that like I say, that I struggle with even now when I see it is people who are in really good, you know, like if I hear about somebody in New York, say on Wall Street, struggling with their life, and I'm like, you own your apartment in New York, you're on a six-figure, if not a seven-figure salary, you know, depending on the scale, but you're hating every minute of your day. You could sell up and move to any 30, 40 states and never have to work again for the rest of your life. But what
Right,
you'd have to do is just downsize to well, you wouldn't have to, you'd probably still be able to buy something 5 times bigger than what you got in New York. But do you know what I mean?
right,
But your property in New York, the taxes you pay in New York, the salary you get in New York, yeah, none of that would be transferable. But you would probably could live in a really nice area, go fishing, go walking in the woods, go, do any of these things. And just by selling everything, you probably would never have to seriously work again. But you're also okay. You're never going to go and stay in the top hotel at £5,000 a night again either. But you could just actually chill out, and it's that there's this thing. I think Tim Ferriss was the first person I ever heard talk about it,
mm,
and I'll be paraphrasing it, but it's the definition of success when you're starting out is the one that you really want, like you were saying, like that brand, that value. How do you practice it? What does it belong to? What does it mean to you? Sort of thing is because too many people get caught up in when they're starting out. If I'm successful, this is the definition of success, whatever that
right,
is. And if I build my company to this, whatever that is, that's success. And then they
right,
get there and they're like, what if I could double the turnover? What if I could double the size? And that becomes the new definition of success.
right,
Whereas if they'd have sold then, they'd spend the rest of their life just pursuing passions. But instead, every time they met a success, a million turnover had to be 10 million turnover. 10 employees had to be 100 employees. Before you know it, they're 62 on their third divorce and having a heart attack, but they're successful.
right,
But the guy that was 20, if he'd have stuck to the principles he believed in, would be would have spent the last 40 years loving every day of his life instead
right.
of being in the back of an ambulance having a heart attack on his third divorce. Yeah.
I think it's for me, but the pattern is comparison, which
Yeah.
social media doesn't help. comparison is the thief of joy, and the never dealing with those childhood definitions or the shoulds. My parents, it ultimately comes into that environment, whether it's a parent or comparing to someone you met at university. I Separating yourself from those old definitions is what I end up working on, even for myself. It's like, well, what am I actually trying to do? And I've been doing this a lot myself. Like, ultimately, I'm lucky I have choices. I did the Wall Street thing. I've saved. I've done, we still have mortgages and we still have bills.
Yeah.
But if I had to go back to university, what would I really have done instead of an economics major? I would have been literature. I love reading. I love writing. And I probably would have gotten my MFA. And so, what can I do now to write? So, the book, God knows where the book is. It's in the universe, it's in the middle of Stonehenge. I don't know where my book is. But what I do know is I could write articles for money. So, how am I going to do that? Like, I'm like, forget this big freaking thing. Like, forget the Ferrari, forget the Porsche
Mm.
911, forget the house, forget this. Do I want a second home on water somewhere? I do, but it's not right now. Like, it's not the right
Mm.
time. I also don't know where the heck we want to go or visit. Do we want somewhere we have to get on a plane? Do we want somewhere we can drive? So it's out there, just like the book, but it's not happening now. So what do I know? Okay, I love writing. If I could go back and do it again and not live in the shoulds, I'd be more writing focused. So that's what I'm going to do. So I've pitched my friend. I've pitched a couple of magazines. That's how I'm working through at this stage, and I'm okay with it. But I do think some of these people who are in that Ferris wheel, you said Tim Ferriss, the Ferris wheel, sometimes you got to get off
Yeah.
and you've got to evaluate. And getting off might be taking a vacation. It might be seeing a coach. It might have to be seeing a doctor. I know so many people who are afraid to go to the doctor. I'm like, you gotta look at what's really happening.
Mm. It's funny. It reminded me of something that I did a couple of years ago. I don't know, like, whether I don't know what caused the decision as such, but
Mm,
I was doing the podcast and I was struggling like mad to get guests.
mm,
Like
mm.
send emails, send this, do this, and just wasn't happening. And I'd gone a couple of months without securing any guests. So
Mm,
you're really getting behind it on podcasts. Is this something you really need to keep doing because it's not enjoyable anymore?
mm.
And I just made a decision that if it wasn't resolved by the end of the year, I was just going to knock it on the head and stop. And that's my
Mm.
decision. And then I just focused on the fact that I'm getting more and more guests. They'll literally just turn up. But if they don't,
Right.
it's not meant to be, and I'm not going to do it. And then out of nowhere, I got contacted by a PR company saying, "Oh, we got these
Mm,
authors. Would you be interested in having them on your podcast?" Okay, yeah, I'd,
mm,
I'd love to do that. And then don't know whether it's just a buzz around New York or whatever, but all of these sort of small publicists were recommending, PR companies, whatever, were saying, "Would you talk to this person? Would you talk to this person?" And that kind of started in about October of 2023. And by the end of October, I was already booked to the end of January 2024 from a decision that I would stop. And
right.
not forcing it anymore. I'm just going with it. And then around that same time is the podcast database that you were signed up to, where I looked you up and said, "Would you like to come on?" They reached out to me and said, "Would you come?" It'd be about this time last year because they asked me to resubmit again. Would I run for another year with them? And yeah, again, out of the blue, they sent me an email saying, "We've seen your podcast. Would you be prepared for us to put you on our list of podcast hosts that people could reach out to?" And I haven't looked at the waiting list for a long time because more guests. Probably if I did two a week for the next 5 years, I'd be all right.
So amazing. Well, I'm grateful to be on here. And I think
One
that
last, sorry, I don't mean
it's,
to cut you off. I just suddenly realized, and
no,
another thing
go,
that
go, go.
changed. My main job
Tell
is in
me.
care work, and I used to work different shifts every week.
Mm,
So actually trying to plan was getting difficult as well. Especially if I'm trying to
mm.
plan like 2 or 3 months ahead. And then
Oh,
out of the blue, somebody left the team that I'm on, and that I'm the manager of, sort of thing. And the rest of them like, do we not cover those hours ourselves, but change our shifts to 24-hour shifts? And I was like, I don't know, because for the last 16 years I've been working different days every week, and it's what I'm used to,
mm,
and I really was stuck and clinging onto that rock. That's where I was anchored, and I
mm.
was just like, do you know what? Problem is, if you want to do that, I'm going to have to work every Monday and Tuesday, and every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. They're the only days, you know what I mean, that will fit in around your 24-hour cycles. Yeah, that's fine. So I've gone from working every weekend, at least one shift a week for like 16 years, different days a week for 16 years, to I work Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays at the same time as loads of people wanted to come on a podcast. And guess what's really organized? How easy it is to organize a podcast when you know you're free every Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
So fantastic. The
But I
puzzle
did none
pieces
of that.
came together.
The only thing I did was decide
Well,
that I'd stop if it didn't work out.
you change the vibration
Yeah.
around those components. And I think that, right? So me not writing the book is, well, and to be honest, well, it's a whole long story. I lost a file. It's a whole thing. And I was like, I'm just going to let it go. I detached, and you're saying the same thing. It's like this
Mm.
detachment from what it's supposed to be. And then I signed up for this human design course. So who knows where that's going to take
Yeah.
me and if I'll be, back. I think I've asked for people, so I don't do podcasts myself, but I write a Substack article on seasons because I do believe there are seasons of life, stages of life, milestones in life. And I love to I do this little interview a lot like the Wall Street Journal does this Q&A. And I asked a bunch of people in December before I was having the second surgery, and half of them said yes. Well, most of them said yes, but then they never followed up. And I'm like, you know what? That's okay. I don't have capacity to chase them down. And the one person writing me back or I'm working with is perfectly like the next perfect person. She is the only person I should be working with. So I agree that once it doesn't always have to be more, it can
Oh,
be like, hey, detachment, ease, flow. But it's not always easy. Like you said, you struggled with that. Do I really want to work these 24-hour shifts? Like you doesn't mean you automatically think of it. You sometimes have to sleep on it.
I would honestly,
We
to
put
this
so
day,
much pressure.
I was forced into this, although it was kind of my decision. When I looked at all the equations, there was no other choice. Certainly not in the short term. And I was just like, okay. And I was the only one that didn't want to do it on the team. Everyone else, this is what we want. This is what we want. And I could not in any way, shape, or form readjust my thinking to see any of the positives or benefits. It's like I was saying it, I was clinging onto it. I just like, this is how we do it. This is the pattern. This is where we are. And as soon as it changed, I suddenly was like, oh, hang on. You're quite thick, really, aren't you? Because you did not see how beneficial this is for you at all. For a guy that prides himself on being able to see the big picture, you're dumb and blind.
Well, no. Sometimes we get our neurons get stuck, but I believe, not you in particular, but the people that I'm around and I'm coaching, when they get so stuck, they're the
Mm.
ones that get fired or laid off.
Yeah.
They're the ones who get the big slap. I mean, this probably felt big to you, but you really walked yourself into it. A lot of people, when they're like, oh, gripping so tight, and then they call me and they're like, I just got laid off. I'm like, well, no kidding, because you were holding on to that role. You weren't flexible to merging with another team, or you weren't
Yeah.
flexible to taking on a new product. you were so stringent because it had the title or the bup, 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 bup. And then a lot of people also want to be seen at work. And I think that's where you and I started this conversation. It's like sometimes you need to have this a little bit of a barrier. This is who I am at work. This is why I'm staying. And then this is what I do to feed myself. They're not always the same. And I think sometimes social media makes it seem like it can always be the same. What feeds you is what pays you. And
It's something I wanted
so,
to
yeah,
ask you a
I
bit
think that
more about
release.
is I think you said something really, really important is, and when you said it, I felt like, oh yeah, I hadn't really looked at it like that. Um, but you said about comparison, and
Mm,
recently, do you know the EFT technique of tapping?
yeah.
Yeah, so I was doing some tapping, and I did a sore back, and I was just like, I don't know what. I know I haven't physically done anything, so what's the emotion in there? There's tension, and
Mm,
it really surprised me because what came up was jealousy, and that you're being
mm,
jealous, and I was just like, well, what do you mean jealous? Like, would never. And I was talking to a friend of mine about this, who was a Reiki healer as well, and I was just like, never would have considered myself jealous of anybody, but it's quite obvious when I think about it from a subconscious point of view. Actually, I do look at other people and compare myself and like, well, how have you got that? How
mm,
did you do that? Why are you successful and I'm not? Not
mm.
it's that kind of inner dialogue that you're not aware is chattering away. And the way it would display itself is that curiosity. I wonder how they did that. How did he meet her? How did she meet him? How does he afford that car? Yeah. How have they got that house? And it seems random, but when you break it down, it's not jealousy is the word that kind of came up. But I think comparison is a much more apt word. Is you're comparing
Mm.
yourself to people, David, and it's holding you back.
I there's so many ways we compare, even in small ways, even if we never leave our hometown. If we never leave, we literally never leave. We never go on vacation, we never get on a plane, nothing. But there are these people that we bounce up against. It's hard not to, but you and I know deep down that there's always something else going on, or there's something on the surface, like the iceberg. They look
Yeah,
great, they look fancy, they have like you said, you have the car, you have the flat, you wear the best suit, you are running around London, and then you're miserable and you're depressed. And, so it's not always the full picture, is what I come down to. Who knows what is going on in those people's lives?
yeah.
So, can they really afford that? Are they on the brink of divorce? Now, it's not always tragedy, but it's this separating yourself and saying, what do I need? One of my mentors always says, what do you need right now?
Yeah.
Do you even want that car? Now, for me, I wanted more time with my kids to volunteer, and it turns out I don't particularly like that. I want to spend time with them, but I don't really want to go to their school very often. I mean, I do a little bit, but not to the extent in
Yeah.
my head I did. So sometimes it's like testing it out. So maybe for you, you want, a certain brand to sponsor your podcast. Well, test it out. Do you really want that? Do you really want them to control, all these things? It's how does it really look? And I do the same thing. I'm on email lists where I get these people who are writing these beautiful articles on careers, and they have a whole team. And like, I don't want to, I did that already. Why do I think I want to go back to running a huge team and metrics and stress? You have to take a step back, but it gets everybody. It gets everybody.
When you first mentioned comparison, I'm just monitoring the time as well, so I'm sorry because you might need to, it's just gone
Yeah,
past the
yeah,
hour. If you need to
yeah.
shoot,
Soon,
just
soon,
say. Um,
soon.
you mentioned comparison, and it starts at childhood.
It's the neighbor. We just went through the holidays. It's going to school and saying, this is what I got from Santa. This is what I did over break. And like that client who had the car and the flat and all of it's an extreme example, but I have friends who are traveling to Europe constantly or doing things like a lot, not just once in a while, but they're living lives that feel really big and bold. And my kids see that. Or comparing my dad's job to my uncle's job. Like there are these ways in which we're trying to sort out where we are in the world. Looking back in our childhoods, it's like, is it what was I trying to assess? But essentially, it does help you find a role and who you are in the community as a child. I think though, when we keep growing with it, it becomes very difficult. So my nieces are in university, they're comparing, well, who's at the better university? It gets so complicated. It's really about staying in your own lane and I think feeding what you need.
Yeah.
But it's hard to be in community and not compare,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think as well as sometimes as well that when we compare, we think they're not struggling. Which is something you were talking about a second ago. It's like you assume that if I had their life, my life wouldn't be a struggle and it would all be perfect. And that's probably, I think, is one of the things that drives it. Just lastly, because I'm aware of the time, and this is a random question, not related to anything. If you could
Mm,
imagine you have a time machine, you can go anywhere in
mm,
history. Where would you go? What car
mm.
would you use as transport? And what music would you be listening to on the radio?
I'll start with the end. I love reggae music. Love it.
Love which music?
I'd be listen
Reggae.
reggae. I don't,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, love it. Love it. I've always wanted to have a party where I had a steel drum band. I don't
Nice.
know.
Yeah, yeah. No, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, no, that's good.
Caribbean vibes. I do love some of the history in England, like the medieval kings and queens, but my real answer right now is Egypt. I would go
Yeah,
back to Cleopatra. A lot of what she did, half of it may be true, half of it's untrue, right? But just this female empowerment, her connectivity to animals, just the
yeah.
reincarnation, the celebration of death, this whole cycle. I would want to be very posh in Egypt. I would not want to be one of the builders, but I would go back and be part of her court. I think Cleopatra's, and I would love to go back and meet one of the kings and queens of England. I just think I love the structure. I do, even in my entrepreneurial space, I love structure. And I think England, the UK does it really well. They do the whole structure thing well.
Yeah, we're unfortunately letting it go a little bit too much. Because I think the problem is when you remove the foundations, you create a vacuum of something that was once holding you up. And I don't think people
Mm,
appreciate that with our history.
mm.
Um, it's actually our foundations. And if you could be driving any car, what would it be?
Hmm. Well, we have this fun convertible that we bought sort of on a whim, and it's this little tiny BMW and it's manual.
Mm,
But I think I'd get a little bit of I love the manual. It's fun. They're not making them anymore really, but I would get a souped up version of that convertible for sure, just because it feels like the epitome of freedom. You
yeah,
can't really talk. You just blast the music, the wind's blowing. And I never thought I'd have one. We bought it, we found a deal, and I would just
nice.
get a fancier version of that.
Very nice. Thank you very much.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to visit.
Yeah, hopefully it'll be soon. And that was Lynn. And it's amazing how many things I didn't talk about. And I will put the links to Lynn's website in the description. Please check it out. Does a lot of stuff. And there was so much more we could have discussed, but we ran out of time. Um, but it's an interesting that her and I both have similar experiences, both in the fact that we've experienced a kind of burnout, awareness, awakening, whatever you want to call it, but that we both have worked with people who, regardless of their health, plowing and just constantly running into brick walls, trying to prove something. And I think that moment she mentioned about comparison really resonated. And if you find yourself in that position, maybe check Lynn's website out. Maybe she can help you. Um, as always, thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Thank you to everybody that comments, likes, and shares. And as always, I really do just appreciate the support. And wherever you are from, whatever you believe, please do take care and be blessed.